Hi, thank you for joining me today. This is a special Instagram Live. We are 5 days post the overturn of Roe v Wade. And I know I can speak for a lot of us that we're very concerned. Thank you for joining. I'm going to be going live with 3 other fertility specialists in just a minute. It's my first time doing a panel of 4, so we we'll be going live here. Hello, Dr. Greene.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent.
You're the first to join. I'm going to accept Judith here. There's Judith.
Hey,
I did it.
Judith, how are you?
Hi, how are you, Robert?
Excellent.
And Ellen should be joining us very shortly. Let's see.
So, Robert, I think you are comfortable with Instagram. I've never joined a live conference with Instagram.
Well, comfortable is a relative term. I'm familiar. I think familiar is a little bit better, and I'm learning how to grow and adapt, and Lisa's been a great coach, and that's why it's wonderful that she's able to assist all of us that don't have her media savvy skills. She's the best.
She is savvy. I tell my daughter, I wish I could have my life experience and her electronic savviness.
Oh my goodness. I'm happy to help you both. I'm learning too. Believe me. Oh my goodness. Well, Ellen is about to join, and I just wanted to welcome everyone who's tuning in live and those who catch the replay. My name is Lisa White. I'm an IVF coach with IVF Manifesting a Miracle, and I'm here joined with will be 3 other specialists. Dr. Greene is a reproductive endocrinologist at Conceptions here in Colorado. He and I have a lot of chats together, having clinical conversations. And Judith Hoechst, hopefully I said your last name correct.
That was good.
Did I say it right?
Yep, you did.
Okay. You are an attorney here in Colorado and work at Colorado Reproductive Law. You're the owner of Colorado Reproductive Law.
That's correct.
Ellen will also be joining us. Ellen Trachman, she is an attorney as well here in Colorado and manages Trachman Law Center. So we will see her in just a bit, but yes, can you believe we're just 5 days post Roe v Wade? And
yeah, it's kind of a crazy time. I think I see, it looks like Ellen joined.
Oh, did she? Hold
yeah,
on.
I see Trachman Law Center.
I invited her. I think she just has to accept.
Oh, okay, perfect. Well, hopefully she'll figure that out. But in the meantime, I could kind of start just a little bit talking from the clinical side.
Yes.
You know, I've been getting many queries, both from patients as well as providers. I spoke with a group of providers yesterday in Nebraska, and I'm supposed to be talking to some OBGYNs from Wyoming later today. And everybody is growing and learning how we're going to be impacted by recent changes in the Supreme Court decision. Of course, we're talking about the overturning of Roe v Wade, which really has a lot of trickle-down applications, including, you know, one of the justices, Clarence Thomas, even suggesting, or some would suggest inviting lawsuits about whether or not contraception should be outlawed. You know, and so clearly there are many different issues that are on the table for future discussions. But what we want to focus on today is what are the immediate and foreseeable long-term impacts that we can envision today on how this is going to affect, you know, IVF care and reproductive care here in the state of Colorado. And, you know, we're very concerned about what's going on in other states. Personally, I'm not as well informed of all the regulations that take place in different states. But, you know, the purpose of today's panel is to talk about Colorado. One of the beauties of having both Judith and Ellen participating is they're both intimately involved in these legal decisions on a daily basis because they see our patients long before these decisions were going on. And they're honestly both involved in the legislature that helped get some very important and I would say supportive laws passed over the last year, even before this recent decision came down. So what we want to do is we want to be able to talk about these issues. We want to be able to answer questions. And one of the things I could tell you, just from the clinical perspective, is that we've been dealing with cross-state issues here at our center now for many years. I've been with this group 8 years now, and during the time I've been with Conceptions, we've seen patients travel here from 34 other states and 22 other countries. So we're very used to dealing with cross-state regulations. And we believe that we're pretty well informed on how we'll be able to deal with the evolving landscape here as well. So if I could kick off with one question that is coming up very frequently from our existing patients already.
That'd be wonderful.
Is the safety of the embryos that they have stored with us. We have our own storage facility. It is stored here in the state of Colorado. One of the things that I've been aware of for years is that Colorado has basically denied personhood status on several previous ballot initiatives by wide margins so that embryos are considered to be appropriately managed at the medical level rather than by other judicial bodies. But that might be a great place for us to start off if either Judith or Ellen could talk about, what is it, HB 22179 or the Reproductive Health Equity Act, which I believe was just passed a couple of months ago.
Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience. Apparently, I do not get a request to join from my computer, so that attempt failed. But thank you for your patience with my tech. But Dr. Greene, thank you for that introduction and for discussing why there are so many concerns right now, and bringing it to the Reproductive Health Equity Act is really important. So state by state, we're now have very different legal protections depending on where you are. And we are very fortunate in Colorado to live in a state that did just pass the Reproductive Health Equity Act, also known as RHEA for short. And that went into effect April 4th, 2022.
So that means it's the law now, right?
It is the law. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So that is the law. And two really important things that RHEA did. One, it made very clear that a pregnant person has the right to make medical decisions for themselves, to continue the pregnancy or terminate the pregnancy, and to completely decide those healthcare decisions as is best for themselves. The other really important part is it reiterated that fertilized egg, embryo, or fetus does not have independent or derivative rights under the law of the state. So embryos are not persons. You still have that same control to decide what you do with your embryos, and that can include discarding them, which under a personhood bill becomes very concerning. So the really good news is Colorado is in a good place right now with the Reproductive Health Equity Act. And I do know that there are movements and hope to have a constitutional amendment in Colorado to make sure RHEA has an even higher protection here.
Excellent, excellent. That's so reassuring. I can't even tell you.
I might add to that that was excellent, Ellen. I want to add to that my recent concern over the donor conceived person statute, that in that statute there were rights given to preconceived people to be able to have access to information and to contact their donors once they achieve the age of majority. And so the concern about that was it is in conflict, I believe, with the Health Equity Act. And so I worry about our future in whether our abortion statute without an amendment added can be fully protected.
Yeah. And, these are very complex issues. And one of the things that, I have to say is so important is that people of reproductive age need to stay engaged in what's going on legally. You know, too often people have just not found motivation to vote on things. And you know, it's important that people are able to verbalize at the ballot, you know, what their preferences are so that appropriate laws can be used, because we do have to live with the laws that we have. And like one of the other questions that I've had come up, and this is especially important for people that live in states that are more restrictive. One of the real powers of IVF is that it does give us the ability to genetically screen embryos. You know, the purpose of that is, you know, a lot of the reasons that people miscarry or have other adverse pregnancy outcomes are things that can be detected of before somebody is actively pregnant. And this is especially important for people that travel to us from states that are more restrictive, is that if we know that an embryo is healthy genetically before it's placed in the woman's uterus, that should decrease the need for reactive terminations. And the point is that if a person is pregnant and knows an embryo is abnormal, in some states, they're not able to do anything about it. And one question that's come to me is the question of non-invasive pregnancy testing. And this is the first trimester testing that most women are offered in their OB. This is where the woman's blood is drawn to test for fetal DNA. And it's a test that specifically is intended to have a high threshold for catching anything that's even slightly abnormal. And I've had a couple of patients ask me that if they travel to us and we do a genetically tested embryo and then they have not NIPT or non-invasive pregnancy testing once they go home, and if that testing is abnormal, what's the implications? And one of the things that I want to make very clear, we've actually seen this happen about 5 times. Each time the NIPT, the test that people get at their OB, has been a false positive. So, you know, people can be reassured at the accuracy of pre-pregnancy testing.
Oh my
That's a good point.
There's so many questions I have. So will anything change in Colorado with use of medications in first trimester for first trimester abortions?
Well, you know, that's one of the issues that still is actively being, you know, investigated. One of the things that I can speak to is having had many years experience treating out-of-state patients. I know based on what we've learned from our experience, we're required to follow the laws of the state that we're practicing. And so many of our patients travel to us for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes we have to initiate care or continue care after they've actually been in our state. And up until this point, for instance, if a patient of mine goes back home to another state that I don't have a medical license, if she develops a urinary tract infection, I could usually call in an antibiotic to treat her bladder infection, even though I'm not licensed in their state, since she was a patient of mine in this state. And we're going to have to see how these laws are going to evolve. But some of our patients might also just be required to come back here for any additional services that are necessary.
May I ask you, Dr. Oh, go ahead, Judith.
Yeah, I had a related question, Robert or Dr. Greene, regarding abortion in the first trimester when medications like methotrexate are used. I believe those medications are also used if you have an incomplete miscarriage. Am I correct?
Oh, absolutely. But ironically, methotrexate is also used to treat certain autoimmune diseases. And
Correct.
You know, there are many medications that have multiple purposes. And, you know, it's going to be difficult for us, you know, to predict, you know, what sort of laws other states might put in place, and how that may or may not be superseded by federal bodies like the FDA, which, you know, regulates medications across the entire country. These are very acute issues that I think is we're going to have to live and learn to a certain degree. But one of the things that I am able to say with complete confidence today is that I'm responsible for the laws of the state where I'm sitting. And so for the patients that are, seeing Colorado healthcare providers, even if they live in other places, we're going to continue to follow the laws of the state and the regulatory boards that we have to answer to, which are here in Colorado and at the federal level, like the FDA.
Are you accepting embryos from other clinics or other states, Dr. Greene?
This is an ongoing discussion amongst different providers. We had, recently stopped accepting embryos from other centers only because a lot of patients are attracted to fertility centers based upon success rates. And unfortunately, if someone comes from a different center, we can't necessarily vouch for the success rates of those embryos. We're trying to develop workarounds to see how we might be able to provide care. But for right now, we're not able to serve as simply a warehouse for people that want to put their embryos somewhere safer. But there is a place here in Colorado that serves simply that purpose for storage. It's a center called Cryogam. I have no financial or otherwise affiliation with them. I believe they're based out of Loveland, Colorado. And what they are is they're simply a long-term storage facility. When I was in practice in other states like California and New York, people were often sending embryos to Cryogam just because it was less expensive option for long-term storage. So until some of these issues are ironed out, we're sort of looking at this on a case-by-case basis, but a great simple answer is to investigate Cryogam.
That's good. I mean, I just can see Colorado becoming flooded with embryos from all these other states, right?
It's potentially a situation that could occur.
It's a potential situation that could occur with other areas of reproductive care like surrogacy, because we have a good surrogacy statute in our state. It protects gestational surrogacy or surrogates and genetic surrogates and the intended parents. But I could foresee that we'll have an increase of reproductive needs in our state just because our state is a great place for reproductive care.
But I
law.
think you're selling that a little bit short, Judith. I know how hard the two of you worked to get that law passed. And that's, again, just a very recent law. So could you provide some details for people that are listening in on because these are very recent changes. And I know how hard you worked on getting that, that law passed as well. So what is the law called and when was that passed? And can you provide some details for people?
So the surrogacy statute is the Colorado Surrogacy Agreement Act, and it was signed by Governor Paulus into law on May 6th of 2021. We started to work on the statute drafting the statute in 2019, and COVID put it a little behind because the day that we had witnesses testify at the House committee hearing, it passed unanimously to the House, and then COVID shut down the state, the legislature 2 days later, actually 1 day later. And so it was delayed a year. The governor signed it, as I said, in May of 2021. And it's a statute that protects intended parents and surrogates and the children born through surrogacy, and actually guarantees parentage as long as you're compliant with the statute. The statute requires that intended parents be 21 years of age or older, that they have a medical evaluation related to the surrogacy, that they have they don't need a mental health consultation, but most good clinics provide it anyhow and require it.
And that is a SART recommendation. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for chiming in on that. And it also requires that each side be represented by a Colorado licensed attorney, that a contract be signed before a medical procedure takes place, and that does not mean the medical evaluation, and that the contract be notarized. For surrogates, it requires a gestational surrogate, to be 21 years of age, actually both genetic and gestational, be 21 years of age or older. have given birth to at least one child, have a medical evaluation and a mental health consultation, also represented by Colorado licensed attorney, contract signed and notarized prior to a medical procedure taking place. And, you know, if you're in compliance with the statute, parentage is determined and granted by a court in Colorado. We always go to the Boulder District Court, and it can be a pre-birth order. There's no hearing required. It does not make any difference if the intended parents use a donated embryo, donated sperm, or donated eggs. So it's extremely comprehensive, and I believe it's the most comprehensive statute in the country.
Thank you for all your work on.
Yeah, truly, truly.
Oh, you're welcome. It was, I mean, my passion in drafting the statute is because I have a child who was born through surrogacy. My second child was carried by a surrogate. And I chose a surrogate, my husband and I chose a surrogate in California because 19 years ago, when we were transferring embryos, California had great laws protecting not just gestational surrogates, but genetic surrogates as well. Now, we used a gestational carrier, but the only reason I didn't look for a surrogate in Colorado is because we didn't have laws here, and I knew nothing about this area of the law. Some of you know that I was a nurse prior to going to law school, and I practiced in the area of medical negligence, so I was not working in this area of the law yet, and that was where my comfort zone was. But I always wanted to work on a statute in our state, so that was my passion.
Which also, you know, if it's, you know, if we don't have a burning question, let's also stay with something that's very positive. Ellen, yeah. I'm wondering if you could give us some update on Colorado's fertility mandate. I know you guys worked so hard on this, and so many people are still unaware of the fact that while some of these scary and unfortunate things were happening at the national level, you guys were working very hard to expand reproductive health care for, you know, people living in Colorado. And can you give us some details on some of the efforts and
Sure. Thanks for that question.
Ellen, if I can interrupt, will you add into that story how CFA started and why it was started?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Sure. So Judith and I are some of the founding board members of an organization called Colorado Fertility Advocates. So all of you in Colorado, we very much welcome you to join, check out the events, check out the webinars, but really joining professionals and advocates in the fertility space to try to make our state better. And Colorado Fertility Advocates work very hard to try to increase access to fertility care, including preservation, diagnosis, and treatment. And we were able to pass the Colorado Building Families Act in 2020, which required that Colorado plans, insurance plans, must provide that treatment preservation, and the treatment must include up to 3 rounds of IVF. So that was very, very exciting. Unfortunately, there were some technical issues with it, so we had to pass another bill this session to at least have it go into effect for the large group market. So in 2023, any plan initiated or renewed after 2023 into the large group market is required to have coverage for fertility care. So that is very exciting and definitely progress, since we know how expensive this process can be, and it's really appropriate that insurance cover it like any other medical issue.
And you know, building off that point, what is the status for our single patients and our LGBTQ community, where it's not always a medical issue, sometimes more of a social issue? And what is their, you know, potential coverage under this?
So the bill, luckily the language was well supported and well vetted by many organizations, including very knowledgeable LGBT organizations that were very clear to make sure that they had equal coverage and would be the same coverage as anyone else. So that is very exciting that it is a good bill for all those in need of fertility care.
Yeah, and that I could tell you as a compassionate provider that really wants to help as many people as want reproductive care. The effort that you guys put out in making this happen is just so astronomical and so well appreciated. I mean, we're very fortunate for everything you've done, and thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And while on the topic of LGBTQ parents, as well as others who turn to egg or sperm or embryo donation, I do want to mention another really good law that passed this session, which was Marlowe's Law. So many people may be aware that if you, for example, are a same-sex female couple, that a birthing parent would naturally go on a birth certificate, as well as their spouse, who is presumed to be a legal parent. But a birth certificate does not entitle you to parental rights. And we've seen growing case law where a non-birthing parent has been kicked off a birth certificate by a judge, really, really concerning cases. And so the advice is that you really need a court order entitled to respect by all states. So we have for many years been encouraging all parents who are not a genetic parent or a non-birthing parent to get a court order. So it used to be that you would have to go through a step parent adoption or other process where you're being fingerprinted and background checked, and it's pretty offensive to have to go through this intense process to be recognized as a parent of your own child. And House Majority Leader Representative Danae Esgar, she and her wife went through this themselves and were, shocked at the law and passed this amazing law called Marlowe's Law, named after their daughter, which provides confirmatory adoption, as we like to call it, or a streamlined adoption process where it's simplified, no background check, no hearing, but you can get that court order of parental protection that entitles that your parent-child relationship is protected throughout the country. So we're very excited for that to become effective in August, and very, very much encourage parents to take advantage of that.
It's so, it's so wonderful to hear that so many good things are happening. And it's kind of amazing because these things happen so quietly. And, bad news is always the clickbait, and it gets everyone's attention. And I'm so glad you're sharing some of the positive things that you've been doing for people in our state. And I guess everyone should move to Colorado.
No,
not everybody.
They already are. It's fine.
The other thing that I might add on to what Ellen said is that because of Justice Thomas, his comments, Robert, that you indicated, I think at the beginning, because of his comments about looking at Oberfell again, and other.
Would you clarify what Oberfell is? Just a lot of people might not be aware.
Yes. Ellen, what year was that? 2015, 16? The Supreme Court determined that married same-sex couples or civil union couples would have the same marital rights as heterosexual couples, but they never addressed the issue of children. And so for reproductive care and reproductive law, we go through when a same-sex male couple has a surrogate carry a child for them, only one parent typically, sometimes neither parent, but most of the time one intended father is genetically related to the child that the surrogate carries. And we, as reproductive law attorneys, have parental determinations through pre-birth orders in our state, where we submit documents to the court and a petition asking the court to recognize and determine that the intended parents are the parents of a child, and a court order is issued. And it takes place from the moment of birth that the parents have parental rights and that their names will go on the birth certificate. But as Ellen said, a birth certificate is not determinative of parentage. It's proof, some evidence of parentage, but the court order should be proof and should determine parentage. However, we across state lines, will fair faith and credit make another state recognize our court order from our state. It is recognized, of course, in our state. But we have this belts and suspenders approach to determining parentage, where in order to secure parentage, probably a step-parent adoption is the way that the non-genetic parent should secure their parentage so that they could never be found to not be a parent of their child. Yeah. With what's happening in our country right now and the laws like Roe V Wade being overturned, could Oberfell be overturned? Yes, it could. And so with the Marlowe's Law, Ellen, would you agree with me that it would be a way to secure parentage for our same-sex dads as well?
So luckily for same-sex dads, they do get a court order as that process. So it becomes, they already have a court order entitled to full faith and credit.
Right.
But I think for anyone who is not a birthing parent or a genetic parent, they really should talk to an attorney and see about what protections they can put in place. And it's become so much more important with the Dobbs opinion and the comments indicating that Obergefell, rights to marriage equality, rights to conception are all on unstable ground now, which is really concerning. And if you don't mind me going dark, I mean, I was happy to focus on the positive when we can, but to go a little bit dark that.
We have to.
So the Dobbs opinion is so concerning for so many reasons. Obviously, the access to reproductive health care is huge and so overwhelmingly depressing where we are, but also the implications for things like IVF are very concerning. So part of the issue with Roe under constitutional law was based on rights of privacy and other rights that weren't written in explicit words of a right to privacy, but derived from other rights in the Constitution. And in this opinion, they said there is no right to privacy essentially under the Constitution, and really threatens other rights that have the same derivative source. So that includes things like the right to reproduce and not reproduce, which is used to understand our ability to control embryos. So we just had an embryo dispute case come out in Colorado last week, where a couple had gone through IVF and later divorced and were trying to decide who could have control of the embryos. One party wished to donate them to others because of her deeply held religious belief that embryos are human life, and the other party wished not to have his genetic material used for reproduction. And the Catholic judge and the trial court ruled that in her favor that they should be donated against his wishes. It was appealed. The appellate court said, no, look at this again. The district court ruled in her favor again. It just went to Court of Appeals again, and they ruled no, that there is this constitutional right to decide whether to reproduce or not reproduce. And fortunately, the opinion that came out last week said that we should lean towards the right not to reproduce and not to reproduce, for people to have that decision-making power. But now that we know that privacy right, that constitutional right may not be upheld anymore, or be considered a constitutional right, it has so many implications for things like this, like the control over your embryos and your fundamental rights to being able to reproduce or not reproduce.
That actually brings up two questions that I've received. One is from one of our patients that says, that she has 5 frozen embryos. Could she be forced to use those embryos? And here in Colorado, I think we can clearly say that that's a definite no. That if she does not want to have 5 children, she does not have to.
Yeah, I've been getting that question too. And I think the good news is, without constitutional protection, we look to the states. And our good news, right, is that Colorado is a good state and we hope to stay that way. So even before the Dobbs opinion, there are states like Louisiana that said embryos are persons that are entitled to sue and be sued. And it was concerning if you could discard an embryo that you did not want to implant in Louisiana. And in those cases, we did not see Louisiana forcing a patient to transfer an embryo for conception purposes. Instead, people transferred embryos out of the state. So I think that's kind of where we are, is that you have to transfer to a state that is friendly if you are in a state that is not.
Yeah, and the point is that in some states already, like Louisiana, people cannot dispose of an embryo. They don't have to use it yet, but they're not able to say that they don't want anyone else to use it either. There's kind of a limbo. But here we are able to dispose of embryos if that's somebody's choice. We also do have ways of putting embryos up for a donation if they do want to donate them for others to use anonymously, which is another option. But abnormal embryos can and are disposed of here in Colorado.
I was going to ask about that, the genetic testing, right?
Yeah.
If they do not have the matching chromosomes.
Correct. Yeah, if an embryo is abnormal, here in Colorado, we do have the ability as clinicians to dispose of that embryo.
And what about around the country? Can we, I mean, remember we talked about where
there's some states where it's already not legal. I could tell you, I turned down a job when I came here, which was, 8 years ago, almost 9 years ago. I turned down a job that even at that time was not able to dispose of abnormal embryos. So they were able to test them. And if they, tested abnormal, they basically are still in storage today, because they're not able to dispose of them unless they, ship them to another state. And people don't realize, that to ship embryos is not inexpensive. It's close to $1,000. It's not easy to do. I mean, it's easy to do, but it's not a simple thing to do. It's not inexpensive.
Better just start your treatment in Colorado with doctors like Dr. Greene.
Oh, thanks for that.
so
fertilization. I just wanted to add one more thing. I was looking at with Lisa last night, we were looking at the map of the country and looking at states that abortion is protected and states in which it's in danger and states in which it's definitely not protected. And Colorado and New Mexico, sit in the middle of a huge number of states that there are no protections. And when we talk about, people thinking about transferring embryos to Colorado, and of course they could transfer to New Mexico, you can transfer them, but will you be able to use them? And if it's happening, if those embryos are coming in from a lot of states, what will happen to reproductive care in our states? How can you handle it all?
Yeah, and it's not a simple answer. To be honest with you, one of the many reasons that we've decided to not take embryos from outside of our own center is the responsibility that goes with that. Not just the pregnancy rate, but there's a center that recently was sued for putting the wrong embryo in, which, obviously, if we would receive embryos, then we'd be relying on someone else's labeling system of which embryos are which. And literally, I could tell you this one center tested embryos for a disease called cystic fibrosis, and then mistakenly placed an embryo that resulted in a child that now has cystic fibrosis. And, part of our reluctance to accept embryos is that we'd be relying on the accuracy of whoever labeled those embryos in deciding which embryos could be used or not. And so one of the things that we're looking at is potentially having to retest any embryos that we would accept so that we could then speak to the reliability and the accuracy of which embryos are safe or not safe for use.
Makes sense.
Yeah, there are 8 states where it's banned and 10 states where it's banned or severe restrictions soon. 12 are threatened, and it's legal in 20 states.
Yeah, so please, people that are watching this, talk about this with your friends, talk about this, with your relatives and vote,
Vote.
We understand that what public opinion is stating, but, I tell people as someone that has silver hair that, if you leave your decisions to the old people, they might make decisions you don't want.
100 times reiterate that. Yeah, voting is so important. Get involved, support candidates that, align with your beliefs. I do want to mention, I know I've been getting a lot of reach outs of where people can put their energies as well as their donations. And I will say there are a lot of organizations that have been on the ground working really hard in this area. Cobalt in Colorado is one that's been really, that's been around and could really use donations for those who are so inclined. And they do help those seeking reproductive care with helping them get access, get transportation, have housing to really be able to get the care they need.
Thank you for sharing that, Ellen. I was going to ask about that, how people can get involved.
I think another organization that could use your support is Planned Parenthood.
Wonderful. Are there any questions?
And don't forget Resolve.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
The
fertility.
National Infertility Association, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they honestly were very instrumental in helping get Colorado's mandate, and hopefully they'll be successful in some of the other states to help others that need access to IVF care as well.
And I just want to highlight, I mean, you all are amazing fertility specialists, and like Ellen, you're the co-chair of the public policy for the Colorado Women's Bar Association. And Judith, I know you produce a lot of legal education for reproductive attorneys, and you put on conferences, right, for the American Bar Association, and are the incoming legal chair for ASRM for the legal professional group.
I am, yes.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
I just want
ASRM is the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. We use a lot of acronyms and we assume everybody knows them. But
yeah. And Fellow of Distinction for Judith. You got an award this year.
Thank you. I do want to add that there are attorney colleagues of Ellen's and mine across the country that do phenomenal work in reproductive law and reproductive legislation. We are going to be having, it's coming soon, a webinar between the American Bar Association's Assisted Reproductive Technology Committee and the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys regarding Roe V Wade and the fallout that is happening across the country, how it affects our clients, our reproductive clients, and also the fertility clinics, because when we all come together, we're stronger. And we all need to be very educated about what is happening in our country as the fallout from Roe v. Wade being overturned.
yeah.
And if you don't mind, I want to give a quick shout out to Connecting Rainbows, which is a great organization that have been helping people with these second parent adoptions or confirmatory adoptions for those who have gone through assisted reproductive technology to have full faith and credit recognition of their parental rights. So in Colorado, we know we have great attorneys to help you with this, but they have a directory. So if you're in another state, they can help connect you with the right person or the right attorney to help you, as well as with estate planning, which, you know, is like, you know, the dentist tells you to floss, the attorneys tell you, you got to have your estate planning, you know, done, get your will, your medical power of attorneys in place.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. That's fantastic. I mean, this is very, very helpful. I'm learning a lot. I can only imagine how much other people that are listening to this are learning. Are there any questions that you had, Lisa, that we've not covered?
Well, I mean, there's probably, we could go on. We've been talking for quite a while, but with the creation of fertilized eggs, and you know, I've been reading some articles, and the Chief Advocacy Policy Development Officer for ASRM, American Society of Reproductive Medicine, he's saying that, you know, what's happening is for 50 years, there's been this constitutional right to privacy. Now that's going away. States can pass laws banning or restricting reproductive medical procedures. So that covers abortion, but it can also include IVF, you know, the creation of fertilized eggs. What happens next with them? Where is this heading?
Well, and that was my dark talk about the Dobbs opinion, that there really is this concern that without these privacy rights that give us a fundamental right to decide to reproduce or not reproduce, we really are in a gray area that becomes very concerning of what our rights are, especially when it comes to embryos.
Yeah.
And so if, you know, what Dobbs did, the Dobbs decision through decision making back to the states as to whether or not, you know, abortion should be protected or not. And so people in each state, you know, you cannot sit on your laurels. You have to stand up and advocate for yourself. You have to contact your legislators, and you have to have a voice. You can't rely on somebody else to do this for you. You have to have a voice. And it doesn't mean just women. It means men and women.
One other thing that I think is also really important is, you know, we've all gotten the opportunity to talk about what we do. I think we all, you know, really owe a huge thanks to Lisa as well. A lot of people that are dealing with fertility, they don't really understand the complexity of these issues. They don't always know what questions to ask or who to ask. And Lisa, you know, has basically come out as someone that's kind of been through the grind of fertility treatment herself, just like I have, just like Judith has. and basically not only came out stronger, but motivated to really help others. And Lisa, if you could talk a little bit about what you do and some of the questions that you're faced with some of the clients you work with.
I think we can speak for all of us. We're so passionate about what we do because we have a personal connection to fertility struggles. And my husband and I went through IVF and had one healthy embryo out of 7. So went through the genetic testing, had a lot of setbacks and surgeries, and I can no longer have any more children. I'm just so passionate about helping women, individuals through this path, because it's really the emotional pains that are the hardest to navigate. And I have a background as an occupational therapist and really understand the holistic importance, the mind, body, and spirit, and created a service to support individuals in navigating through this really challenging ride. So, I see women around the world do virtual coaching, and it's just so important to me to help women just shift and have a different experience through this really personal, transformative experience,
And Lisa, what you bring to the table is so significant, because 1 in 8 people struggle with infertility, 1 in 6 couples. And we all know, those of us who struggle with it, there's a sense of shame that comes with it that you can't control, even though that's not reasonable. You can't control that. And to know that you have a support person with what you do, and to help somebody navigate the journey when you think you're alone, is really important.
And you have a book. Do you want to mention your book?
Sure.
Oh, yes.
Check out her book.
I have a book, Hold On Baby. Dr. Greene wrote the foreword. He was my fertility doctor. Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. A lot in the works, developing programs, and really eager to support those of you on this journey. I understand it very well. And, it's without mentioning, we all understand how challenging and emotional going through infertility is, and then to deal with what's happening with the overturning of Roe v Wade. It's like another layer, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm so grateful to all 3 of you for jumping on and sharing your expertise. I learned so much. I know everyone who joined and will watch the replay will learn a lot. And I'm sure we can do another talk. There's going to be, it's evolving, right?
It is evolving.
Every day, it's new developments, and grateful for you all in Colorado for sure.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just one shout out would you all share your websites and how people can find you?
Sure. So Trachman Law Center is my law firm. It's trachmanlawcenter.com. You can add in the comments.
And your podcast?
Oh, and I have a podcast called I Want to Put a Baby in You, where we've been very lucky to interview professionals and people with personal stories. So you can really, it's really fun to get to hear all these stories and to feel not alone for many people.
Mm-hmm.
And then my office is the law office of Judith Hoechst, and my website is coloradoreproductivelaw.com.
And Dr. Greene?
Oh, I have a blog, enhancingfertility.com, where I try to post things that are available to anyone that they could consider in their own treatment journeys, wherever they're at. And I recently participated in a podcast with same-sex male couple that channeled their journey to having their son as well. And basically, we just want people to feel empowered with knowledge.
Yep. And I'm at IVFmanifestingamiracle.com. So thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thanks, Lisa, for having us.
Stay happy and smile loudly.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.